Good morning, everyone. As we're letting attendees into the webinar, we'd love it if you would put into the chat where you're tuning in from. I'll start and say I am tuning in from Tucson. Oops. Cleveland. Wow, Philly, Chicago, Fairview Park, Rochester. Oh, Pigtown. Hi, Kim. Akron, Albany, Washington. Oh, I can't even keep up. Oh, Las Vegas, great. Really interested to hear, Las Vegas, your perspective on this. And we're just going to wait until everybody else joins before we get started. And as you can see in the chat, we're putting in where we're tuning in from. Hi, Chris Garland. Oh, wait, John, is that really you, John Lehner? I thought that you were indisposed. Hi, Eric. Oh, you got your meeting rescheduled. Okay, that's great, John. Still have a few people coming in, but it's slowing down. So maybe I'll go ahead and get started. So let me collapse a little bit here. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This is a very hot topic. We're going to be talking about the impact of institutional investors on middle neighborhoods, and we're really lucky today because we have a team of panelists who had a head start in a way, or chose to take a head start on the rest of us, and really documenting, digging in deep to understand what was happening in their city, their metropolitan area and neighborhood, depending on which speaker we're talking about. I was just reading this morning that this is an issue of investors buying up housing stock that's not just in the United States, it's worldwide. People are getting really concerned about it. And so I hope that at the end of this session, at a minimum, everyone will have had a chance to really think about the issues at the micro and macro level, and have some tools for really just digging in and figuring out what's going on in your neighborhood right now. Oh, we still have a few people coming in. I can see them. So this event is being sponsored by the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, and we are a national initiative, fairly young, only about 5 years old, and we're focused on mobilizing attention around the disappearance of middle neighborhoods through decline or gentrification. And by middles, we mean neither the most distressed neighborhoods in a community nor the healthiest, those sort of middle of the road neighborhoods that were the place for a lot of people to buy their first homes, who most people thought were on sort of autopilot, but we're seeing that they are in fact disappearing through slow decline or gentrification. And what we do in this initiative is that we have a community of practice. That's the segment of our initiative that's sponsoring this. We facilitate peer-to-peer learning among middle neighborhood practitioners. I think we have about 800 now. Some policymakers and researchers as well, through webinars, events, case studies, newsletters. There are virtual site visits. Hopefully we'll get back to in-person site visits. We do research into topics that are relevant to practitioners and policymakers. Mostly we've been targeting that on specifically around Black middle neighborhoods for the last couple of years. So a lot of interesting insights into that. We do policy analysis and advocacy and communication strategies. And the initiative is co-managed by the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America, and it has a steering committee of about 20 researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. Our website, by the way, go ahead, is middleneighborhoods.org. I think any second now they're going to flip the switch on our new redesign, but I think you can still access it. And at the bottom of any page on our website, you can sign up either just for our newsletter or also to be a member of our community practice. So I encourage you to do that. So our guests today are just outstanding people in their fields. I think for sure Sally and Jamie are members of the COP. I hope if Tim isn't yet that he will be soon. So Sally Martin is a longtime member of the community practice. She's the housing director for the city of South Euclid, Ohio, which is, I think, a first ring. I never know if it's first ring, but suburb of Cleveland. Tim Covey is the business process analyst. Oh, we kind of misspelled that. He told us that was the job title that was available at the time he was hired, in any case, for the city of Cleveland. But he's really done a lot of deep analysis on the entire metro area around investor purchasers. And Jamie Lucas Bauer is from the Old Brooklyn CDC, and she's the neighborhood development project manager, and she's been studying what's going on in the Old Brooklyn neighborhood for quite a while. Our agenda, is, well, I'm just about done. And then we've organized it around Sally giving her perspective as a city person, and then transitioning to Tim to talk about the MSA perspective. And he's also created a typology of investors that could be very useful to everyone. And then Jamie's going to talk about the neighborhood perspective. And then we'll switch back to Sally to talk about the strategies and policy recommendations from a group that all three of the panelists are members of. I believe it's called VAPAC, but we'll let Sally tell us about that. So I think now it's time to switch it over to Sally.
Okay, thank you so much, Marcia, and welcome everyone. We're very excited to speak to you today about a topic near and dear to all of our hearts, investor behavior in our neighborhoods. If you want to advance the slide, Marcia. This is a little bit about South Euclid, which is an inner-ring suburb of Cleveland on the east side, a relatively small city, very racially diverse, with a very middle neighborhoods type price point. And I would say that for 2021, sky's the limit. We have seen such crazy activity in our real estate market this year as we have in many of the cities in Northeast Ohio. I would say that our median is going to be closer to 140 next year. And if you want to advance the slide, Marcia. South Euclid, like so many other smaller cities and middle neighborhoods, is an attractive community of homes that are affordable to most people. It's a quintessential middle-class neighborhood with a perception of safety and decent schools. And so unfortunately, what this meant was that when the housing crisis hit, we were very ripe for the takeover by investors to come in and purchase our houses. So if you're not familiar with what is called a cap rate, it's typically the net operating income of a rental property divided by the purchase price. So when our values collapsed, which as many of you experienced, say 2008, 2000 to 2012, it was possible to pick up one of these beautiful homes in South Euclid for about $20,000, maybe $40,000. 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath home, nice fenced yard, decent amount of space. Rents never collapsed the way home sale prices did. Rents stayed robust. So we never got below about $1,100 to $1,200 a month in rent. So for an investor, a 10 cap is the goal. So 5 and 10% on a cap rate is the goal. For many of our properties, we were looking at a 30 and up cap rate. So of course, it was amazing. It was like the Wild West. They were all coming in and flooding us, and it was crazy. And so at this point in time, 45% of the rental properties in our city are owned by out-of-state buyers. And many of these buyers are in Israel or, overseas, and they create an LLC for that, to hold that one piece of property. And it's an LLC that is exclusive to that property. So it's very hard to track down. But we happen to have different ordinances that I'm going to tell you about that have helped us kind of pool our resources and use our municipal powers in a way that has helped us get control of it. So next slide, please. So at the worst of the housing crisis, our lovely neighborhoods started to have more and more just very distressed housing, to the point where we ended up having to tear down about 130 houses in our small city, which is pretty unheard of, had never happened in South Euclid before, but that's where we were. And we were desperate to try to get to the bottom of what was going on in our market. And one of the ways that we did that, and if you want to advance to the next slide, was to establish a collaboration among colleagues that broke down municipal borders. So if any of you have ever seen presentations from Frank Ford of the Vacant and Abandoned Property Action Council, VAPAC has been going on, which is this ad hoc group of community development practitioners that gets into a room, or now on Zoom once a month, to talk about issues that affect neighborhoods. Vacant properties, demolition, and now with COVID-19, we're focused on issues of tenant displacement and things like that. But this group has really been a game changer in our region. It has allowed people who were very siloed, that worked at the county, that worked at different municipalities, to finally start to talk. And one of the ways that VAPAC does its work is through working groups. And in 2017, just out of frustration, we established the Investor Working Group, which we previously called the Bad Actors Working Group, because that's what we were trying to stop, the bad actor activity, the bottom feeding flippers and speculators that were coming in and taking up all of our real estate. So we established this group. I was the founder of it, and then very happily handed it off to Tim Kobe and Zach Shermanek to take over, and they've been running it ever since. And essentially the idea was to share information and best practices. We had done this for years informally, and it was very effective between cities. We would have little coffee clashes at a First Suburbs meeting and talk about what we could do and who got who in court and how we could fix this. And so that's what's been going on. Next slide, please. So for us in South Euclid, we've had some strong code enforcement strategies for years, and some of the ones that have really helped is our annual rental registration, which requires an inspection of a property every 3 years inside and out. And we don't register properties with delinquent property taxes, and we have to have a local agent in charge if there's out-of-state ownership. We also do things like coordinate with our housing authority to make sure that houses are registered and violation free. We work with our school district, and we have pretty aggressive fees for non-compliance. We also go out and inspect owner-occupied homes every 6 years for the exterior. We're also pretty aggressive about orders of nuisance abatement and demolition as needed. And we also monitor property transfers very, very carefully to look for properties being flipped and properties, that are going through processes without involving the city. We look at Realtor.com and Redfin to really dial down at what's going on if a dilapidated property is transferring. Next slide. And a game changer for us, because we are not a city that has a point of sale. We developed one specifically for vacant properties, which requires a full interior and exterior inspection before a vacant property could be resold. Buyers have to assume violations and escrow the cost of the repairs, with a daily fine of up to $1,000, imposes a lien on the property if they don't comply with criminal misdemeanor charges. Next slide. So this has led to some success for sure. So if you want to advance to the next slide. houses that we thought couldn't have been sold that were ready for the wrecking ball. Over 1,200 of those homes have been made fully code compliant, and over 200 million investment in our neighborhoods since 2010. So it was definitely a game changer. Next slide, please. So here's an example, and I know Jamie's going to touch on this in her presentation as well. One of the investor groups that's aggressive, and they are local as opposed to out of the country, like many of our investors are, but this is called Holton Wise, and they put all kinds of videos out on the internet and talk about how you can make a fortune in real estate, and they're trying to do that in Northeast Ohio, and of course, South Euclid is a sweet spot for them. We would be perfect for them. They wanted to buy everything they could buy in South Euclid. And this details the prosecution that we went through for one particular property, which is pictured here, 4661 Liberty Road. It was bought by a California investor through Holton Wise, who advertises all this on the internet. They submitted a rental registration with the wrong payment. They didn't respond to any of our notices. And then we filed charges just against John Holton, even though he wasn't entitled. We knew he was the agent in charge. So they found him guilty in a bench trial. They paid fees, and we have not had a problem with him since. And so this is the city's aggressive tactic of going after agents in charge, not just owners of properties. And it's worked out well. They only own 2 properties in South Euclid now, and they're absolute choir boys about complying with us. Next slide, please. So one of the results of this tactic and being aggressive about rental properties is we've actually seen a net decline in rental properties in our city, which has really been helpful. So it's steady reduction. So we've lost, 98 rentals became owner occupied in 2020, 89 in 19, and 99 in 18. So it's a little bit of a steady decline. So in our city of 9,600 parcels, we have about 1,800 rental properties at this point in time. Next slide. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Wow, so interesting. And I cannot believe, it's just so rare to see any market where investor properties are transitioning to owner occupancy. That's really interesting. So our next panelist is Tim Kobe, and he's going to dig deep into the research that he's done on what's going on in the larger market of Cuyahoga County, in which Cleveland and South Euclid are both in. Go ahead, Tim.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to take a look at Cuyahoga County and then some of the submarkets within Cuyahoga County and try and track investor activity through property sales data. So part of the reason I did this is I saw lots of headlines like this. And also, as Sally mentioned, I've been involved in the investor working group. So I really wanted to try and get a handle of what was going on in Cleveland and what was going on in Cuyahoga County. I wasn't sure, is this a big problem that we have, a little problem? Maybe this is past, or maybe we haven't even got into it yet. So I wanted to go ahead and try and figure out what was going on. So I thought about how to build a data set around this. In the Cleveland area, we have a data warehouse called NeoCanDo, and they have sales data going back to 1976 for Cuyahoga County. And I think the acronym NeoCanDo is Northeast Ohio Community and Neighborhood Data for Organizing. And you can find them at neocando.case.edu. So then I knew I had all this sales data, and I knew I could determine who was buying property. And then I needed to determine, well, what time period should I be looking at? And I wanted to go back before the foreclosure crisis to see how investor activity occurred during the crisis, and then kind of look at where we're at now. So that way I had like a couple different comparisons to make over the years. I limited it to 1 to 3 family structures to look at just residential property. You can see here the different buyer types that I ended up having as my categories. But really I'm focused on the difference between business buyers and individual buyers. That being said, an individual buyer could themselves be an investor. There's just really no way for me to tell that from the data set that I have access to. So we can go ahead and get started here. So this is our baseline data. This is 2004. And you can see for Cuyahoga County as a whole, the business buyers accounted for 7% of residential property transactions. And the one thing that really stood out for me is the east side of Cleveland is at almost 16% here in 2004. And since we have a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the country today, the east side of Cleveland is predominantly African American, almost 80% according to 2000 census numbers. All the other submarkets were low; they're all below 10%. So then we can jump to 2020, and we can see how these numbers have risen. So the east side of Cleveland went from 15–16% up to 45–46%. East inner suburbs, so this would be where South Euclid is located. It went from 6% up to 28%. And also west side of Cleveland is up about 19 percentage points from 6 to 25. So on the east side of Cleveland and the east inner suburbs are the parts of our county that are predominantly African American. Investor buyers accounted for over a third of all buyers. And in fact, on the east side of Cleveland, there were more business buyers than individual buyers in 2020. So then we can look at what happened over time. So we know our two bookends. We know 2004 and we know 2020. But how did investor or business buyers change over time? So here's our numbers for 2004. And you can see as we went into the foreclosure crisis, so here's 2008, 2009. You can see on the east side of Cleveland, it kind of spiked up above 30%. East inner suburbs are in here in green. It went up there. Same thing on the west side of Cleveland. They had a rise in business buyers. Now for the west inner suburbs and our outer suburbs in Cuyahoga County, those actually remained relatively flat up until 2012. So in some markets where we had high foreclosure rates, we see this rise in business buyers. And then it almost appears as if those folks kind of exited the market. The way that they were investing was kind of buy and try and flip fast and get rid of the property. But now in 2012, as the economy kind of recovered, people are maybe looking what to do in terms of investments. People view real estate as a good investment. So then we see this rise in business buyers all across the board here. So where we didn't have any increase in business buyers for our outer suburbs or our west inner suburbs, they start to see an increase from about 5% to 10%. We also see this rise in the other areas too, increasing from 15% or so up into the 20s. And the east side of Cleveland went from about 20% all the way up to 45% over this time period. And the last thing that I'll highlight here is going from 2019 to 2020, the east side of Cleveland continued to see an increase in business buyers, whereas all the other submarkets decreased a little bit or remained flat. So that's something to track for 2021, which I'll start the beginning of the next year, and just see if this downward trend continues for some of these submarkets or if they're going to tick back up. So now we know the overall general pattern for those submarkets. And what I did here is I pulled data specifically for middle neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland. And these are specific block groups that meet the city of Cleveland's definition for middle neighborhood. So Jamie's going to present a little bit later on Old Brooklyn. This does not account for all the activity in Old Brooklyn, just the specific block groups that meet Cleveland's definition of middle neighborhood. But you can see down here, so the way this works is the darker colors are the left axis. So our business buyers, like the total number of transactions in a given year. So you can see 3 of the middle neighborhoods are down here in the 20s. And then here's this other dark green line here. This is Lee Harvard, and they're up closer to 40. you can kind of track over time how these rise here, and then how Lee Harvard just kind of separates from the pack there. And to be perfectly honest, my introduction to middle neighborhoods was maybe 2-3 weeks ago, so I'm not quite sure what makes the difference here for Lee Harvard. But I will say that when I first looked at the middle neighborhood data, I was like, oh, they seem to be kind of, they're not immune from investor activity, but they're kind of insulated. Like they're not influenced too much by it or too little by it. But then when I looked a little bit closer, like Lee Harvard really stood out to me. And you can see like they're up to almost 45% here. They did drop in 2020, but that kind of lets me know that there's, you know, a lot more nuance with middle neighborhoods than, you know, maybe my brief introduction of 3 weeks ago or so. So now with the general patterns, we can look at price points to kind of get an idea of what types of properties businesses are buying and what types of properties individuals are buying. So you can see here's 2004, east side of Cleveland, businesses are buying low, $30,000. Individuals are buying higher, about 80,000. West side of Cleveland is relatively in that same ballpark there. And I'll get into that in the next slide because I actually have some more detail on the city of Cleveland. But what we can see here for Cuyahoga County based on these median values is that it really appears that businesses are buying at the low end of the market. And when you look at the values for Cleveland versus the suburbs, they tend to be buying in the city of Cleveland versus suburban markets. One other thing I'll point out with this slide is you can see, you can kind of track these over time, whereas there was this gap between businesses and individuals, what they're buying at. And then it kind of remains for most of the submarkets, and then most of them have recovered here by 2020. But on the east side of Cleveland, that gap disappears here in 2012. And then you're starting to see it a little bit here in 2020, but it's generally still staying there where individuals and businesses are buying at about the same price on the east side of Cleveland. The last thing I'll note is that our two submarkets that are predominantly African-American, neither one has recovered their housing prices in 2020. So then I think I'm going to get into, I'm going to do just the Cleveland difference over time here. I don't think I need to spend too much more time on this because I already discussed it in the previous slide. You can see how much prices bottomed out during the foreclosure crisis. You know, east side buyers, individuals and businesses were both down around, you know, $10,000 per property. West side individuals didn't really bottom out until 2010, 2011, and they're about $40,000. But here we see this recovery again for west side buyers. You see that gap again for businesses and individuals. But then on the east side, we still have this really close price point between the two. So then you start to wonder, well, are individual buyers on the east side of Cleveland, are they themselves investors now? So then here again, I have our middle neighborhoods. The ones on the west side are in blue and the ones on the east side are in green. And so you can kind of see the differences between the different middle neighborhoods that I was talking about that kind of stood out to me the more I looked at the data. So you can see here, our west side middle neighborhoods are about the same. But then as you move to 2015 and 2020, you can kind of see where Jefferson has grown to about 60, whereas Old Brooklyn has kind of stayed behind a little bit, but they have since recovered a little bit. But the other thing that I'll note is our east side middle neighborhoods. You can see individuals are buying at about $90,000 in Collinwood and $81,000 in Lee Harvard. And that's a big difference between the $40,000 price point overall for the east side. So price can serve as a proxy for quality, but working for the city, I have access to a little bit better data. And in the longer version of my presentation, I have a couple other slides on quality. But for this one, I'm going to focus on severely distressed sales. So these are sales where there was a board up permit around the time of purchase. 6 months before, 6 months after. And for us, a board up indicates that the property was open, vacant, or vandalized. It means it was open to casual entry. These are properties that are typically in very bad condition. Generally speaking, they would be in need of demolition or extensive rehab. So you can see where most of these sales are occurring. Most are occurring on the east side. There's a few pockets on the west side. And then I did go ahead and outline our middle neighborhoods. You can see Jefferson's there, Old Brooklyns there, North Collinwood's up here, and here's Lee Harbor. They have, like a little bit more distressed sales occurring in that middle neighborhood. So with these distressed sales, you might expect to see more construction permit activity. If a business is buying a distressed sale, you would expect them to pull a permit to make repairs. Unfortunately, that's not really what we've been seeing. It's really only about 10% of the time that permits are being pulled for any type of construction activity. And when you look at only building permits, so a building permit would be more extensive work than some of our other construction permits, like an electrical permit or a plumbing permit or an HVAC permit. So you can see when you look at only building permits, those values really drop. One other thing to consider is permitting rates are actually higher on the west side than they are on the east side. And when you look here, you see most of your distressed sales are on the east side. So you would expect to see more construction activity on the east side of Cleveland, and that's currently not the case. So this is just a map to show you where the construction activity is. This is, I guess you could call this like our hot market right now: Ohio City, Tremont, Detroit Shoreway. But then you can see that construction activity is kind of happening all over the city, especially in our middle neighborhoods here. You can see Old Brooklyn, Jefferson, Lee Harbor. Not much happening in North Collinwood, and that's one of those things where I'm not too familiar with the middle neighborhood, so I can't offer a suggestion as to why that's happening. And then you can see when we take away those electrical permits, plumbing permits, other permits, that the activity on the east side really decreases. Although we do still have some nice construction activity in Lee Harbor and our other middle neighborhoods, minus Collinwood. So here we have some conclusions from our quantitative data, and that's businesses as buyers has increased substantially from 2004 to 2020. East side of Cleveland, housing properties have not recovered from the foreclosure crisis. Distressed sales are still occurring, most often on the east side of Cleveland. And so we kind of have to think, are people on the east side of Cleveland, are they able to get mortgages at low values? Are they themselves investors? Just a few more highlights here. I said only about 10% of sales get a construction permit after purchase. And one of the slides I pulled for time looks at rental registration. And what that showed was that only about 20% of properties get a new rental registration after they've been purchased. So it's kind of looking at, well, if they're not rehabbing and then going ahead and selling that, maybe they're buying and holding it as a rental. And if they are, they're not registering their properties. So that led me to 3 less than ideal possible scenarios based on taking all this data together. One is that businesses are speculating or otherwise holding property vacant without improving it through legal rehab. Businesses are renting property out without registering it, obscuring it from the rental registration process and the lead registry that's being rolled out right now. Or businesses are renovating property without pulling permits, throwing into question quality of work. So we have all this quantitative data, but then part of what's come out of the investor working group is a more qualitative approach. This has been us meeting and talking and figuring out the different types of investors that we're seeing. So based on those conversations over the last 3+ years, 4+ years, I guess now, we developed these different investor types. And I think the first thing I'll say to start is that new investor tactics are always emerging. based on market conditions, plus what we're doing in terms of policy at the municipal level. And these are three different types that emerged through our discussion. And one is what we're calling the bulk property manager. They probably don't own any properties themselves, maybe one or two. They like to bring in outside investors, often from out of state. That way they can kind of still maintain control of the property without actually being the titled owner. They might have a contract with the owner that tilts towards evicting more often. You know, they'll get a fee for the eviction, they'll get a fee for the placement. Meanwhile, the owner is sitting waiting to get paid for rent with the new tenant. They may come to dominate a housing market in a neighborhood. If they really like a neighborhood, they might just start buying up property even before it makes an MLS listing. And you can run into situations where it's a they said when it comes to repairs. The owner's telling us that they gave the property manager money to make the repair. The property manager is saying we didn't get the money or we didn't get enough money. So that often presents a problem for us when determining who to go after and who to get to make the repairs. Another type of investor that we came across is what we're calling the agent web. So this is somebody that was likely an investor themselves, probably during the foreclosure crisis. Now they might just do YouTube videos or an investor newsletter about how they made all their money in real estate. And it's so easy, you can too, I can help you. And usually what happens is there's something that gets lost in translation between that initial person that's saying this is how easy it is and the people that they bring in. And then when that person realizes that it's not that easy, then they have to go ahead and find somebody to take a troubled property off their hands. And what we see a lot of times is that the worst properties end up getting cycled through to the least prepared investor. The way I describe it is it often ends up looking like a pyramid scheme crossed with a game of telephone. Not in a good way in any way. And the last type of investor that we see often is the mom and pop investors. This is small inventory. They tend to be local. They tend to be willing to work with tenants, and they tend to be willing to work with local officials. They're usually more vulnerable to market cycles. They might not have cash or credit readily available to make repairs. So all that together, the quantitative data, the qualitative data, led us to have some policy recommendations. And I'm actually not going to get into them because Sally's going to do that later. But maybe one thing to highlight real quick, because I'm sure I'm probably running out of time, is that these policy recommendations are really built around the findings from the quantitative data and the qualitative data. So just as an example, the last bullet point on there is commit to funding for remaining demolition need. And I'll just say that demolition does not come up a lot in the investor working group. I do a lot of work around demolition, just not for the investor working group, not for anything that I do around investors. But looking at the data, looking at that slide with the distressed sales and how prevalent those are on the east side of Cleveland, it really made me think and made the investor working group think, we do still need money for demolition to get rid of these worst of the worst properties so they don't continue to cycle in our neighborhoods. And with that, I'll turn it back over. I think Jamie's next.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Tim. Boy, that was fascinating. I can't wait to really examine all of your slides. So yeah, so Jamie's going to talk about how she feels the impact of this situation on a particular middle neighborhood, Old Brooklyn. Go ahead, Jamie.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Jamie Lucas Bauer. I'm with Old Brooklyn CDC. We've been tracking bulk buying activity for several years, and I'm happy to share what we're learning. Not moving. Here we go. Since Old Brooklyn is probably not the center of everyone's universe like it is mine, I wanted to kind of give you some basics. Old Brooklyn is Cleveland's largest neighborhood, 6 square miles and 35,000 residents. We're just about the size of Shaker Heights. We have the fastest growing Latinx and African-American population in Cleveland. And we are the quintessential middle neighborhood. We're still stable, but teetering, and it could go either way. We never fully bottomed out. So we also don't have the larger development opportunities that brought neighborhoods back like Ohio City or Tremont. There are many types of investors, as Tim Kobe alluded to. The most aggressive ones in our neighborhood and many other middle neighborhood communities are kind of a combination of both property manager and agent web. They're kind of real estate management and brokerage firms. They work to attract out-of-town investors so they can get all the fees. They don't even, in many cases, show properties until you have a contract. They don't want you to see the property. They don't want anybody to even really be in town. They want to collect the fees for property management, evictions, landscaping, snow removal, and even pest removal. They make their money on the fees. And sadly, evictions for them are a financial incentive. The more they turn and burn, the more fees they get. So they don't want rental assistance. They don't want to work with people. They want them out. Property management and brokerage firms, and we're calling them investors, but they're really in reality extractors. They're not putting money in. They're just taking money out of these properties. They target middle neighborhoods because they want communities that are stable enough to attract families that will pay $800 to $1,100 a month, still have a mix of owner occupants and rentals, and incomes of at least $40,000 a year, and homes in their mid-range. They love homes in the pricing between $60,000 and $120,000. Bulk buying destabilizes our communities. They bring housing prices down. Housing becomes more deteriorated over time, and low and moderate income families lose their ability to build wealth through home ownership because these firms are targeting homes that are naturally affordable to moderate and working class families. We are seeing troubling trends. I looked at our 2021 data through October. We are seeing more and more big buyers. We had 3 with 2 million or more bulk transactions, and they purchased 27 homes so far in 2021. We have 4 foreign entities who appear to be related to each other and Holton Wise, and they purchased 16 homes in Old Brooklyn and 130 in Cuyahoga County so far in 2021. My numbers are a little higher than Tim Kobe's for our bulk buying because, unlike Tim, I kind of do know that Nikki Cafantares is a bulk buyer, where he would never know that. So my numbers are higher. But so far for 2021, 26.2% of our buyers are bulk buyers, LLC, and individuals who are in actuality bulk buyers. That's up almost 10% from 2015. There's also a concentration of bulk buying along our commercial corridors. You can kind of, I wish that map doesn't have the roads, but the Pearl Road is our main corridor, Broadview State and Memphis, and that's where these concentrations are. So even though it's 26%, we have some streets that are along our commercial corridors that are 60 and 70% of the transactions are bulk buyers. A kind of a deeper dive overall for 2021 so far, our single family sales are at 114,000. The median sales for bulk buyers is 89,000. And our median sales on streets with the highest concentrations of bulk buying is 80,000. So there is a dramatic difference in what people are getting for their homes. And we are getting phone calls, and this is kind of anecdotally, but we're getting phone calls and from residents who are being targeted. They're getting texts, mails, emails, and they're really targeting longtime homeowners and grantees of probate cases. And also bulk buyers, as Tim alluded, are nudging our owner-occupant buyers out of the market because they're offering cash with no contingency, which is very attractive to sellers. As mentioned earlier, bulk buying doesn't just impact communities, it directly impacts the ability of low and moderate income families to grow wealth. Low income families can afford homes in the 50 to 80,000 range, moderate in the 80 to 100. And these homes are getting gulped up within 1 day of being listed from these bulk buyers. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jamie. We're going to switch back to Sally now to run us through the recommendations that are in a soon to be forthcoming white paper that's going to be released by this working group on what they think are the best strategies countywide to tackle this problem. Go ahead, Sally.
Thank you, Marcia. The recommendations, as you might surmise from just listening to us over the last hour, is that strong code enforcement is absolutely critical. The only way to drive this type of behavior out, this type of investor who doesn't want to invest much in properties and wants to milk a property, is to use code enforcement to its best advantage. Also, through our collaboration through the working group, we've also learned that coordination with law departments is essential, because even if the building department wants to enforce aggressively, sometimes the law department can throw up some difficulties and some hurdles in the way of that. And then regional information sharing is powerful, as we're learning, as we have shared how to reach people, how to serve people in court. We all become more successful. Next slide, please. So this does not encompass all of the recommendations that will be in our upcoming white paper, which we think will be published in the first quarter of next year. But essentially, the top recommendation is hold every person or entity with a responsibility to maintain property accountable. And this is done through a concerted code enforcement effort. Requiring a local agent in charge for non-local property owners has been a game changer for South Euclid and other cities that also have implemented that piece of legislation. Transfer existing property maintenance violations to new owners. Now that sounds like it should be a given, that violations on property should transfer with the property, but that is not always the case. In some cities, including Cleveland, we're actually making all of those violations null and void when an ownership changed. And we know that LLCs can flip to each other overnight 10 or 15 times, skirting code enforcement in those cities. So having the violations run with the land and the new owner would be accountable for them is a pretty easy win to make that new owner immediately accountable to that property condition. Also, making better use of the ability to use criminal and civil proceedings for code compliance. So the majority of code violations are criminal citations, which means that one must get service and have someone come into court to be held accountable. Well, many of these entities are very opaque. We can't find them. We can't get them into court. It's very hard to get someone from Israel into court, and even a local agent in charge can say, I'm no longer managing that property, and then where do you go? So many of us are starting to look into a dual criminal and civil approach toward gaining compliance. And a good example of this is in Franklin County that does this. They will impose civil forfeiture of $100 each day if the owner has failed to comply. So in addition to having those criminal code violations, going after companies civilly and hitting them where it hurts in their wallet is another great way to do that. And so we're all investigating that very carefully. Tenant protections become more and more important as we get into an environment where we have a lot of out of the country investors. They are merciless about eviction. So someone can be one day late paying rent and they're quick to file an eviction, because in many cases, the property manager is making money doing this, because as it changes tenants, there's a fee that they pay, that the owner has to pay to get a new person in there. And so they're just racking up their fees. So it's in their best interest to evict very quickly. Whereas a mom and pop landlord would probably be understanding about a job change or someone has a difficulty and they're not so quick to evict. So we are advocating for expanding right to counsel, enacting pay to stay legislation, and source of income protection. So we think that protecting tenants is critical, especially in this post-COVID world that we're in. Enhancing enforcement of rental registration ordinances. Many cities have these on the books, but are very spotty about enforcing them. And making that a priority, we think, is critical. Requiring an interior and exterior inspection, including assessing lead hazards every 3 years, should be standard everywhere. Properties can become very dilapidated, and tenants are often afraid of retaliation and they won't complain to their building department. We also would like to see capital repair funds accessible to mom and pop landlords through a loan loss reserve fund so that there is a pot of money to keep them going, because many of them are struggling just like their tenants are, and they can't make large repairs, especially with lead remediation, which is a huge problem in Cleveland and the inner ring suburbs. We want to ensure that adequate funding is available to demolish vacant parcels that cannot reasonably be rehabilitated. Now, we know in Cleveland, there's still 4,000 properties that are single family to 1 to 3 family residential that need to be demolished. So the job is not done. And unfortunately, those are always the ones that get snapped up and churned and create true problems. So creating also a targeted down payment assistance program to spur home ownership in areas with high rates of business ownership would be very, very helpful. As Jamie said, many of these properties are selling for cash with no contingencies, and especially FHA buyers are just completely shut out of the equation. There's no opportunity for them at all to become homeowners, which is disastrous in terms of building generational wealth, especially in majority minority areas. So that concludes the recommendations, but it just touches on them. So I hope you'll all look for our white paper coming out in the first quarter of next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I'm going to kick off the Q&A period with just a question of my own about your last recommendation about down payment assistance. And I just wonder, there's no reason why you should have solved this problem when nobody else has, but it sounds like down payment wouldn't be enough to compete against an investor that's doing all cash with no contingencies. And is anybody even talking about strategies that would maybe have an intermediary purchase a property for home buyers, or some other way to compete against investors?
We are
Any
Brooklyn,
of you?
actually looking at applying for a grant and through HUD and partnering with CHN to kind of build a pot of money, about $10 million, where we can be cash buyers, sell to owner occupant buyers, maybe after stabilizing it with just getting code compliance. So we don't have that funding yet, but we are looking at that.
Very interesting. And also on this, oh, go ahead, Sally.
I was just going to say, the climate in Cuyahoga County has changed dramatically, not for the better, as far as CDCs acquiring properties through tax foreclosure or through state forfeiture, just because of our Ohio has gone to an online sheriff sale process and also has eliminated what we used to use quite frequently, which was an expedited tax foreclosure process called Board of Revision. And so we are all at a disadvantage right now. And what Jamie's describing is a great idea. And hopefully with ARPA funds coming down, we can create a pool like that, because you're right, even with down payment, there is just no way to attack this except by purchasing with cash. And we're starting to see that with companies like Divvy Homes. If you guys are familiar with this national company out of Silicon Valley, it's actually a lease purchase program that is a short-term lease purchase. So Divvy will come in as your cash buyer, buy the house. You'll pay them a monthly payment, which is your rent, plus a little extra towards your down payment, with the idea that within 2 years, you're going to perform that into your own mortgage. And at first I was very skeptical, and I thought, well, this is obviously a scam and it's terrible. But in this market with cash buyers, it makes a buyer competitive. So even if they're eligible for a mortgage, I think what people are doing, and Divvy is confirming this, is they're coming to them and having them be the cash buyer out in front, and then they're going and getting their mortgage and not staying in this lease purchase.
Very interesting. Well, I've also want to call on one of our participants who I know thinks about this a lot. And I actually asked him to be prepared to say a little bit about what he's doing to help, just to work on this issue of home buyers being outfoxed by investors. And that's Bruce Dorpalen, who is the executive director of the National Housing Resource Council. So Bruce, you want to, let's see, I don't know if you can unmute yourself or if Ann needs to do that for you.
I just unmuted. I hope it worked.
Yep, it did.
Okay, all right, you never know. Well, thanks a lot. What a terrific presentation. Thanks for the great work you all are doing locally. It's really, really important. Um, you know, we come from a lens of looking at these issues around um, housing counseling and home ownership, and especially the Black and brown home ownership gap. And this has huge implications, as Sally mentioned, that will be generational and continue creating the problems we have. And so one of the things we're hearing a lot about is, and it's been mentioned a little bit here, but that first-time home buyers are really at a disadvantage in today's market. So in many markets you hear that people don't take FHA loans. You mentioned that, Jamie. We're certainly hearing they don't take down payment assistance because it slows things up. You're hearing that they don't take VA or USDA loans, or they don't take mortgages at all, and they will only look at cash offers. So all those are really deeply problematic. And you know, our people, the people that we're really trying to bring into the homeownership market, are going to have a mortgage, and hopefully they'll have a down payment assistance. And there is an opportunity, we hope, with the Build Back Better Act to have a much more aggressive down payment assistance for first generation, first time home buyers that could really help in these markets. Not a complete solution, as others have said, but it's part of it. So that's a big problem. And then there's this issue of who are the institutional buyers that are coming in and driving up prices, and certainly out of state, out of country investors are part of the mix. And there's also these private equity companies that we kind of mentioned a little bit, but they're quite a force in the marketplace, and they have these essentially they track the market, and especially in markets like Phoenix and Atlanta and Las Vegas, where a property comes up and it's immediately they make an offer. They are not looking at the appraised value. They're not looking at the market value. They're looking at taking what would normally be a starter home or owner occupied home and flipping it to rental, and the economics on that are much different. So they can make a much more aggressive offer on these properties. And they've actually said it so that if somebody makes a counter offer, they will up their offer, and they know exactly where they need to go, so that you're constantly in a bidding war, escalating prices. And the other thing, which I think a lot of people have said and seen, is that they're generally not very good landlords, that they are very, unfortunately, head nodding there, which we don't want to really see, but I mean, it's just terrible. They're very fee driven. They don't do repairs easily, and they escalate rents pretty rapidly. And we're seeing this in lots of different markets too. And there's a lot of work being done around the mobile home manufactured housing parks, and the same problem of escalation of costs and taking away affordable housing. So we have really big problems in this field. So I think this idea that, so we're very interested in the models that say you can be you can purchase with where a nonprofit might come in and become the cash buyer and then be able to sell. And so, and there's a little bit of work being done with Homestead CS in Indiana, HomeWise in Albuquerque are also looking at this. We would think this is an area where great public investment would be really helpful. I am very concerned about these companies that come in with wanting to as private entities, as for-profit companies that want to come in and offer cash. I understand the creativity of it and the availability of capital to be able to do this, but you really worry that the money-making incentive distorts. These aren't mission-driven people in the way that you would like that the people that we're talking to in this conversation. So I'm very worried about those as the solutions, but if we could figure out a public way or a nonprofit way of doing it, I think those are really important pieces. But I think we also need to have both local and national strategies about how to prioritize first-time home buyers. and how to make it so it's possible in their marketplace. And can we create climates? And I think the middle neighborhoods, people are often talking about this in really powerful ways where people who are thinking about selling will think about, can I, I would rather have another family raise their children in my house, and really target as selling to an owner occupant. And can you use mechanisms to really make that something that happens in your neighborhood? And I would love to have national solutions. Anybody else has better solutions? We're certainly trying to look at it. There's ways to limit some of the private equity companies, but it's a tough road to go. And I think I think the local work will be key to all this. Oh, and we did a brief a couple months ago, and I just put that in the Q&A section, so you can take a look at that if you'd like.
Definitely take a look at that. And so, Bruce, what are your thoughts about, can you imagine there being any sort of first look scenario where an owner occupant buyer, those buyers have a chance to buy properties before investors do? Or is that just anathema to our market economy?
Well, I think some local city governments are looking at this in the tax and foreclosure sale world. And California had a very, or actually, I guess it's California, a very innovative program. But unfortunately, the problem is that even in these tax sales, the houses have gotten so expensive that I mean, the one example of a family that was actually able to buy was a $600,000 house, and only because there were lots of people stepped in to fund them doing it. But yeah, and I think really making First Look work better than it used to work, and people need to have time to do this. So it's not like you can just walk in and glance. You know, you need to arrange financing, and it needs to work for people. So you mentioned the auctions as a key thing. Well, a lot of houses are sold in auction in the United States. There is no mechanism today to incorporate individual owner occupants. And so it really is just for developers. So kind of rethinking what that model would be. But I think First Look is an important part of that. DC has done something like that for apartment buildings. They figure out how to do something similar for owner occupant. I mean, it's a complicated issue because of all the property rights issues are so high in this country, but it's, we have to figure it out.
It does make sense that you would start with the properties you have some control over, which are those that are foreclosures, for tax foreclosures, or perhaps mortgage foreclosures, depending on if you can partner with somebody around that. It's not just a matter of worrying about the investors being very unhappy about a First Look program for first-time home buyers, but the sellers too. I mean, let's face it, it's the sellers who are taking the cash offers and no contingency offers over those offers that involve financing and contingency.
So this is an interesting thing. And so one of the things that I've been hearing is when you talk to real estate agents who are deep into serving the communities we serve, is that it might not be the sellers. It might be that it's the real estate agents who frame up, oh, you don't want to have somebody with a mortgage, I can get you a cash deal. And they've even found in some marketplaces, the cash deal might be less, but because it's a quick turnover, and because that's all about what the real estate agent is doing, that they're part of all of this. So, right, so we'll see.
So you never know. You have to dig deep to understand what's really going on.
Right.
And it makes my mind goes to post-purchase housing counseling, or, post-purchase homebuyer counseling. And as some organizations do that anyway. I wonder if it's time to roll out some curriculum on, understanding the market you're in now, or what to do about investors offering you, making purchase offers to you and things like this, just to start to educate people on that. One of our attendees asked about the idea of zoning as owner occupied only. has that ever been a thing anywhere? Anybody? I'm not a zoning expert.
I mean, this is a complicated field too. It's worth talking about, but it's also, there's a whole movement to try to increase the number of houses, increase density in neighborhoods. And this also plays out into the issues of racial equity. So you kind of.
Yeah, it's very tricky.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
it could have unintended consequences that would actually exclude people from living in a community. So it's very tricky. Let's see what's going on. Let's see, over to the Q&A. Oh, that is where I am. So there's a Cleveland specific question. Are there more recent pandemic observations of the possible consolidation of ownership of rentals from mom and pop landlords to larger investors due to COVID hardships plus recent legislation? I've heard a lot of anecdotal stories from smaller owners. I sold my property because I couldn't afford new lead compliance plus the hard COVID times. Wondering if that is being observed elsewhere. What do you think, Tim? Do you have any way of observing that, or Jamie? Are small mom and pops selling out to the big guys because of forthcoming lead regulation? Or
I don't know about lead. I would say maybe anecdotally from the pandemic, but I've not heard anybody that intimidated about the upcoming lead regulations. What about you, Tim?
I haven't heard that either. I think so we can, it's hard to sometimes figure out who's a mom and pop and who's a bigger investor just from the sales data that I have. So that would be something where you would kind of have to have some specific knowledge. Maybe that'd be something that could be done just at a neighborhood level. Like Jamie has a ton of like specific knowledge to Old Brooklyn. So she might be able to be like, okay, I know this is a mom and pop investor and they did sell to a bigger investor. But at the city level, it would be hard to do just because I think it was Sally that mentioned a lot of these investors, they'll do like one-off LLCs for every single property in their inventory. Yeah. So it might look like a small landlord on its face, but when you actually finally dig into it, you realize that, well, it's related to these other 30 companies. So it's just something that's hard to sort through unless you have a ton of local knowledge, like at the neighborhood level.
Yeah. Sally, did you want to add something about the zoning topic and I didn't give you a chance?
No, I actually feel like that would have fair housing ramifications. And I can't imagine we would ever get away with passing legislation that prohibits renting a property. But I was just going to say with the situation of sell-offs of rental properties, which we've been seeing a lot of, anecdotally, because this community is so small and I know people and I talk to them about the reasons, the values going up have been a catalyst for a lot of people wanting to unload rental properties right now. And so, of course, what we're seeing is that those are getting bought up and then the tenant is calling and saying, the new landlord just told me my rent's going up $500 a month. So we've seen a tremendous amount of tenant displacement just with this bump up in home values. And I do think code enforcement can drive out people, but for the most part, these are people who weren't maintaining and weren't able to maintain. And so we have seen some larger investors buying where smaller investors couldn't rehab appropriately and that kind of thing. So it's sort of a double-edged sword.
And Sally, you, I think in one of our prep phone calls were telling me something I didn't know, which is probably reflected in what you just said. So I would have guessed that if investors were selling off because prices has gotten high enough that it was worth it to them to just, make their money on the equity in the property, that they'd be bought by an owner occupant. But you were telling me that some investors are willing to go way up higher in prices than they used to 10 years ago.
Yes, because even though, back in the day when prices had bottomed out in South Euclid, you were getting a 30 cap. you're still getting well over a 10 cap, even at these higher prices, because our values are still very reasonable. So people are doing it. And
Yeah.
just to validate what was said earlier, I was attempting to downsize myself this year, and I had put in an offer on a house in South Euclid for $55,000 over asking. And I had a conventional mortgage and 20% down, and I was outcompeted by a cash investor who bid $5,000 lower.
Wow. Lower. Wow.
Right, lower, because they wanted the quick sale. They
Uh-huh.
assumed there would be a lack of contingencies. Other things could fall through when you have a
Yes.
mortgage. So yeah, they're going for it. And a lot of prospective home buyers are having to cash out of 401ks, borrow money from relatives, and then do
Mm.
cash out refis.
The house I bought a year and a half ago wanted me to do no contingency offer and not even an appraisal contingency. And that really made me nervous. And of course, that was a year and a half ago. So I was able to say no and still buy the property. I wouldn't have been able to do that 6 months later, I don't think. So I wanted to acknowledge in the chat that Julia Panko says that there is one community in suburban St. Louis that has just limited rental permits to 30% per block. That's interesting. You know, I could actually get behind that. I mean, it makes me think of condominiums where Fannie Mae won't lend on a condo, right, if it's more than 30% rental. So Bruce will know the answer to that. So that's a thing in condo communities. And then John Lehner said that selected communities and HOAs are big out west where I am, have owner occupant requirements that have been court supported, but are dependent on active HOAs to actually, I assume, pay attention to them. Okay, and then Barbara says, also happening in college towns like Binghamton, New York, LLCs buy up rental properties, minimal improvements. The college student rentals are crazy. I lived in a college town for 25 years, and Anne still does. $2,500 to $3,000 a month. Oh my goodness! And she's showing a picture that sold for $550,000 and then $4.4 million 2 years later. And let me tell you something, in Binghamton, New York, I don't even have to look at the pictures. Like, are you kidding me? I would never have imagined there was any property in Binghamton that was worth 1 million, let alone 4. But that student rental income is significant. Let's see. Julie had an earlier, sorry, I'm sort of going backwards. An issue in St. Louis, especially on the north side, which as I understand it is more African-American and the south side is more white, is that neighborhoods that have no appreciation and possible depreciation over time. So homeowners are stuck in homes because they can't sell, all right, so like negative equity. And the only person who will buy from them is an investor. And they've torn down so many homes in these neighborhoods to the point that rebuilding will take decades. Interesting. When a home needs repairs and is not suitable for retail market, like foundation cracks, maintenance issues, that's when investors buy. The question is how to help homeowners that have maintenance issues to sell their home without having to sell to an investor. Well, that's interesting. Does anybody have ideas for that question? I mean, it's really a problem with the market.
Well,
Go ahead, Sally.
We've had trouble with purchase rehab loans generally, and banks not wanting to write those. So one of the things we've been doing in Northeast Ohio is pushing an agenda on local lenders to lend in communities and actually get out there and make these products available. So the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition came about because we noticed that banks were taking deposits and not lending in these communities, essentially redlining them and making them cash markets, which is what we think's really happened on the east side of Cleveland. It's all cash. So we need the lending products. So we're pushing our local banks to do those things and to be more aggressive about getting out there with it.
Yeah, certainly, well, I'll say this. There's an interesting thing that I know in fact, the co-chair of our community practice, Nidra Sim Spears, works in 4 Black middle neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago. And the last time I talked to her, was a finalist for a big grant from a insurance foundation. And what she wants to fund is a loan pool that's designed for sellers. And it would, in her mind, the problem she's trying to solve is to get properties at higher quality so they can sell for a higher price when they sell, so that they don't just get recycled back into the investor pool, and so that she can raise appraised values in the neighborhood, because they're very depressed in her neighborhoods. And so she wants to design a rehab loan product that is specifically targeted to sellers, and even more specifically in some cases, a sub-market of that would be the people the heirs to a property, who have inherited a property. It needs repairs if they're going to sell it, and have it be flipped to an owner occupant or get a decent price. But if they're not living in it, it's a vacant property, and they probably can't get a rehab loan. So I think that's a very interesting idea. I have thought about that for a while myself, about how to finance seller repairs in a market. The trick is that it has to be a market where either you have a lot of money to take losses, or the market after rehab appraised value would actually, you'd get that money back. What else have we got in here? Sheila, do you still have your hand up? Sheila Squire? Unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that I did.
Oh, it was an accident? Okay.
Must have been an accident. Sorry about that, everybody.
Oh, I see. So Chrissy says that she's in North St. Louis, and airship property abandonment is a concern. Yeah, I bet it is. I really bet it is. I know there's such a stark difference in housing values between middle neighborhoods on the north side of St. Louis versus the south side. It's really a tragedy. And, I've certainly been involved in my whole career about rebuilding housing markets, but you have to start small and really be concentrated about that. Chrissy, do you work with Cornerstone? That's the only nonprofit organization I know of in St. Louis. I know there are dozens more, but that's the one I know. Okay, we don't know. All right. And I think that John, the questions for John Lehner have.
Okay, thank you for sending. Thanks. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to unmute.
That's okay. Go ahead, Chrissy.
Yes, no, I have not heard of Cornerstone, so that's an agency that I reach out to. But I've come in contact, like I say, airship, and quite a few of the individuals are just as involved individuals who are homeless, and the property that was left for them need repairs before it can actually be habitable, for them to even live there. And so that's the struggle for them, not being able to find employment, to even try to be able to, one, to obtain a loan, or two, to even just have their own personal funds to repair some of the property. And so it's really a struggle for those, and they're homeless.
Terrible. And so trying to get a rehab loan on a property you inherited while you are homeless, that sounds like a nightmare. But yeah, I encourage you to get a hold of Cornerstone, as a first step, Chrissy. It's a really solid organization. Nancy is saying negative equity areas, disinvestment is investor having it sure is. Low credit scores by most poor families stop them from getting loans. Anyone study the fairness of credit scoring? Lots and lots and lots of people study the fairness of credit scoring. I mean, one of the big challenges used to always be, that they said it was proprietary information, what factors they examine in their credit scoring. Sally, say more. We support alternative forms of credit scoring, huge issue. Oh, and Bruce Urban Institute has done good work on that. Lower credit scores in Black and brown households. Yeah, I know, just chatting with the director of home headquarters in Syracuse, it's been sort of a dream of his for a while to try and create an alternative credit scoring system, particularly for the Black and brown households in the neighborhoods that he serves in Syracuse, New York. It's a big deal. And, you know, the other thing is, it's just such a combination of terrible factors, is that if property values are really depressed, like $50,000 or less, you know, that is, I've encountered many communities in my career where most of the housing stock was in that price range. So first of all, lenders don't like doing loans on that are that small, because the fixed costs of doing that loan are the same, whether it's 50,000 or 500,000. So it doesn't make sense for them to do that. And also the people for whom a $50,000 house is the top of their buying power are probably very low income and probably have a lot of credit issues just that are associated with being low income. So, you know, I have seen nonprofits try to wrestle with, could we do our own first mortgage lending on these really low cost properties so that we're, you know, basically having a different set of underwriting criteria. And perhaps after we season those loans for a few years and show that they are paying on time, then we could sell off those loans to bigger investors and replenish our loan pool.
That is happening in the Cleveland area now with CHN Housing Partners and the Believe Mortgage product. So Cleveland CHS Housing Partners has become a first mortgage originator. They are a CDFI, a newly minted CDFI, and the partnership is with the partnerships with Huntington Bank, and it uses alternative scoring models and does small dollar mortgages of $75,000 or lower. So far they've written about 27 mortgages. It just launched in April, and they have about 30 more in the pipeline, and those will be serviced by Huntington Bank. So it's a great partnership and a good example.
Oh, thanks, Sally. That's great to know that that example is out there. Maybe we'll try and get them into another webinar. Can somebody type in, could you, Sally, maybe type in the name of the organization? Chrissy, yeah, okay, Chrissy, if you see Tawny Smith is here with us and she's from Cornerstone, and she has given you her email, so you can reach out directly to her if you see her name in the chat there. Okay, any other questions that anybody has? Stephanie says, we need to change the housing policies from the door. Yeah, that's been true. That's true. And there, I mean, it's so obvious from Tim's research that all of these angles, everything that's happening is happening worse in communities of color. You know, that's where, you know, unethical loans get targeted. That's where the prices are lower. And so that's where the investors go. That's where people try and get away with stuff like not registering their property with the rental registration program. It's absolutely a civil rights issue. And it is something absolutely that has to be taken charge of if we're ever going to correct the wealth gap. So it's CHN Housing Partners. Yep, everybody's putting it in. There's their website. I'm definitely going to have to reach out to them about this. And I believe also, Sally, that they are going to manage the loan fund once it gets going. Aren't they related to the $1 million loan loss reserve that the city just agreed to fund for
Yes,
rehab loans? Was it for rehab?
they're handling a lot of the programs that are coming through the ARPA funds and through the city's Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. So yes, and they're also doing all of the rental assistance for the area.
And they just got their CDFI designation?
Last year.
Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. And I believe they are the NeighborWorks organization now in Cleveland too. Is that right?
That also came through last year as well.
Okay. So they've got a lot of irons in the fire, and it sounds like they're very, very interesting irons indeed. Okay. if there's, maybe the city should use American Rescue Funds to offer cash for distressed homes under a land bank program. I haven't heard anybody talk about land banks in particular having strategies about going out to compete with investors in the interest of serving potential home buyers. Anybody else?
I think Cuyahoga Land Bank is a pretty aggressive developer and is pulling things off the state forfeiture list and through tax foreclosure rolls and rehabbing and reselling and building new at this point. And I know in
really?
Franklin County, yes, and in Franklin County, I believe they've linked up with a community land trust model, which is a really interesting strategy as well to make sure that permanent affordability.
Yeah. Where is Franklin County? It must be immediately adjacent to you guys.
The Columbus.
Oh, it's Columbus. Okay, great. And Nick just posed a question about I know Nick's from Cleveland too. What happens to the vacant lots after demolition, like for you, Sally?
Well, typically what occurs is that a lien is placed on for the cost of the demolition, which leads to a tax foreclosure. So some years after that, typically those lots end up back in the city's own land bank to be repurposed. Most of them, they could be purchased at auction by a developer if they wanted to be, but typically those end up in city coffers.
And then do you like try and sell them or gift them to the adjacent owner, or do you have enough demand to get somebody to do those developers actually build infill?
Well, that strategy depends on the neighborhood that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So in South Euclid, we have a CDC that we created called One South Euclid, and we have a program and a conduit where those properties are then an option agreement is given to our CDC to try to sell them. So for us, we have sold many of them for redevelopment and some for side lot consolidations. So again, that's it's under local control. So it just depends on what the strategy is for the city that you're in.
Makes sense.
And then an example for the city of Cleveland is, like Sally said, those properties will go to the city land bank. And in the city of Cleveland, they typically hold all the parcels. Some of those will go to an adjacent owner, like for a lot expansion. But just an example, so the city's done a lot of work in the Circle North neighborhood. So anybody familiar with Cleveland, it's on the east side, just north of University Circle. So that's why it's called Circle North. So it's where Case Western Reserve University is, University Hospitals. So it's just north of there. So the city held those vacant parcels in the land bank. And then as that development project has gone on, they've used those parcels for different purposes, depending on what the development called for, whether it was helping out with a commercial development, or I think they made some of those parcels available to a developer.
Yeah. It's its own set of problems. There's so much from there's a lot was done about maybe 10 years ago or so on vacant lots, and really, really interesting programs. New Orleans had an amazing program for vacant lots. So if vacant lots become an issue, that's something that there's a lot of, a lot of experience about. So we always like to promote one of our friends and partners, the Center for Community Progress, do their own webinar series. That's a really great one. They call it the Cornerstone Webinar Series. So check them out. Please email us if you have any ideas for webinars, case studies, if you have news stories, etc. There's going to be an evaluation form after this. We'd love for you. It gives you an opportunity to fill out some of that stuff. And please join us in the Middle Neighborhoods Community Practice. We have about 800 people now. We have probably 2,000 or 3,000 on our bigger mailing list. We're at middleneighborhoods.org. Let's see. I guess I lost that last thought. Oh, I just wanted to say that Anne will send out an email to everybody who registered for this webinar, and you will get a link to the recording of the webinar. And I think enough people have asked for it, a link to the slide deck. Oh, and Ann's going to do a follow-up case study that sort of summarizes some of this, and which may come later. And I think that we should also, Ann, give the link to that white paper that Bruce Dorr Palin's organization has done, so that all those resources are together. And then we'll also post them on our website. So we're not quite sure what next month's webinar is going to be. We're almost there, but keep an eye out. And I really, really want to thank from the bottom of my heart, Sally, Tim, and Jamie. I'm so grateful that the three of you have done so much work on this for so many years that you can share sort of your roadmap for how you came about doing it, and give us, you know, some ideas for how everybody else could do it in their own communities. And we really look forward to the release of your white paper and hope that you'll do an event around that as well. So take care, everybody, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.